The Grail officer called Sivrak had catalogued 1,247 species across 11 star systems, and in all that time, across all those worlds and all those wars, he had never seen anything fight the way the humans fought in the dark. He watched from the elevated command tier of the observation station above Vel Prime as the battle unfolded below, his four compound eyes cycling through thermal, electromagnetic, and sonar overlays in rapid succession, each feed more confusing than the last. The human unit, 17 soldiers, according to the pre-engagement manifest, had entered the collapsed mining complex 47 minutes ago. The Drathali assault force numbered 312. Standard Grail tactical doctrine stated that an interior engagement at an 18-to-1 disadvantage was classified as a recovery operation, not a combat mission. A recovery operation meant you sent in extraction teams afterward. You didn't expect survivors. The Drathali commanders had deployed their force with that exact confidence, spreading through the tunnels in their bioluminescent formations, their natural light organs pulsing the soft violet that indicated combat readiness, their sensory tendrils sweeping the air for the infrared signatures of human bodies. They found nothing. For 11 minutes, they found absolutely nothing. Sivrak had leaned forward in his observation harness, adjusting the gain on his sonar feed, certain there was a calibration error. The humans had to be somewhere. 17 biological entities could not simply cease to exist inside a sealed environment. And then, without any preceding signal he could detect, without any change in the electromagnetic or thermal spectrum that his instruments could register, the Drathali began to die. Not all at once. That would have been comprehensible. That would have had tactical logic that his military training could process and categorize. Instead, they died in groups of 2 and 3, in complete silence, in total darkness, at irregular intervals that suggested no pattern his analysis systems could extrapolate. 71 Drathali soldiers were dead before the first one managed to transmit an alert, and the alert itself was 3 words: "We cannot see." That was the moment Sivrak stopped thinking of humans as a minor concern. But it was not the most disturbing thing he would witness that night. The most disturbing thing came later, when it was over, and one of the 17 walked out into the light. His name was recorded in the mission dossier as Sergeant First Class Marcus Hale, age 31, 188 centimeters, 89 kilograms. His biological profile had been assembled from data the Grail Intelligence Corps had gathered over the preceding 3 years of intermittent contact with human military units, and on paper, Marcus Hale was an unremarkable specimen by human standards. Moderate cardiovascular output, average musculature for his occupational category, no genetic enhancements logged, no cybernetic augmentation listed in his service record. Sivrak had studied the dossier for exactly 4 minutes before the operation commenced, and then he had set it aside the way one set aside information that had been processed and filed. He had not expected to think about it again. The Grail Interstellar Compact had classified humans as a Category 3 civilization, technologically emergent, biologically fragile, strategically negligible, in the first formal assessment conducted after the Vel Prime contact event 2 years prior. Category 3 civilizations were monitored, occasionally traded with, and generally left to their own development cycles, unless they occupied territory the compact required. Humans occupied Vel Prime's outer processing ring, which the compact did not require, and so the official policy had been one of patient observation. The Drathali had a different policy. They always had a different policy. Marcus had been on Vel Prime for 6 months by the time the Drathali offensive began. His unit, Reconnaissance Team Obsidian, had been embedded with the Planetary Defense Force as advisors, a category that, in Sivrak's experience observing human military culture, meant something considerably more active than the word implied. Vel Prime was a mining colony, not a military installation. Its human population numbered roughly 4,000, most of them contracted workers, and the Planetary Defense Force was 38 people with light weapons and a single atmosphere-capable gunship that had last been serviced 14 months ago. When the Drathali fleet dropped out of fold space above the planet, Sivrak had expected the humans to evacuate. Standard Category 3 response: get the civilians out, seed the ground, file a diplomatic protest. That was the logical action. That was the survivable action. Marcus had gathered his team in the Defense Forces Operations Center and said 11 words. Sivrak had reviewed the audio capture multiple times since, turning those 11 words over in his mind like a stone with something underneath it. "We're not leaving these people. Tell me about the tunnels." Nobody left. The mining complex beneath Vel Prime's northern plateau was 340 kilometers of interconnected shafts, chambers, and service corridors carved through basalt and ferrite ore deposits over 60 years of industrial extraction. The Drathali assault force had chosen it as their primary staging area because it was defensible, centrally located, and, critically, because Drathali biology gave them a significant advantage in enclosed underground environments. Their bioluminescent organs allowed natural communication and navigation in complete darkness. Their tendrils could detect pressure changes in air currents caused by movement up to 40 meters away. They had evolved in subterranean environments on their homeworld, Dravian 5, and in 300 years of military history, no recorded engagement in tunnel warfare had gone against them at odds lower than 4 to 1. At 18 to 1, their commanders had not considered the word against applicable. They had never fought humans underground before. The first thing Marcus did, according to the operation log Sivrak subsequently obtained, was order every light source in the complex disabled. Every emergency strip, every equipment indicator, every personal illumination device carried by every member of the Planetary Defense Force, and every civilian sheltering in the lower access chambers. Total darkness. A darkness so complete that Sivrak's optical instruments, reaching their lowest sensitivity threshold, recorded it as equivalent to the interior of an unlit storage container sealed against all external radiation. The Drathali moved in their comfortable purple light, their tendrils reading the air, their formation discipline immaculate. They had fought in darkness before. They preferred it. What they had never done was fight opponents who preferred it more. The data from the tunnel engagement, once Sivrak's team reconstructed it from sensor logs and physical evidence, told a story that he spent 3 days trying to fit into existing tactical frameworks before concluding that no existing framework applied. Marcus and his 16 soldiers had moved through the complex without any light source, without any electronic navigation aid that transmitted a signal the Drathali sensors could detect, and had maintained unit cohesion across 11 hours of continuous engagement inside 340 kilometers of dark tunnel. Their kill ratio, confirmed, not estimated, was 18.4 Drathali soldiers per human combatant. In the history of compact military records, the highest documented kill ratio achieved by any non-compact species against a Drathali tunnel force was 3.1, achieved by the Sarathi during the Pyros 5 campaign, and the Sarathi were a species specifically noted for their superior sensory apparatus. Humans had no superior sensory apparatus. Sivrak had the biological assessments. Human eyes were almost comically limited, a narrow visual spectrum, poor low-light performance, slow adaptation cycles. Human hearing was functional but unremarkable. Their sensory profile, by every metric the compact used to evaluate combat potential, suggested a species that should have been catastrophically, helplessly blind in those tunnels. The word should had begun to feel dangerous to him, because the humans had not been blind. They had been quiet, and in that distinction lived something Sivrak could not initially name, but which kept him awake in his rest cycle, turning over the sensor data, watching the reconstruction simulations, trying to find the moment where the logic broke down. It broke down at the same place every time. It broke down at the moment he isolated the audio capture from the Drathali soldiers' final transmissions. They had not reported human positions. They had not reported any contact at all, not until it was already too late. What they had reported, over and over, in the clipped transmissions of soldiers trying to communicate without attracting attention, was an absence. Nothing in Sector 4, nothing in the eastern shaft, nothing on the upper level, nothing, 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 and then 3 words: we cannot see. The Drathali, in the dark, with all their evolutionary advantages, had been unable to detect the humans, and the humans had detected them, with no technological advantage, with no biological advantage, using nothing but the tools their species had developed over 40,000 years of being the most persistent predator on a planet that had been actively trying to kill them since before they could speak. They had listened. They had smelled. They had felt the air pressure. They had read the faint warmth of bioluminescent organs through skin that, it turned out, was more sensitive to subtle temperature variation than any compact assessment had ever bothered to measure, because no compact assessment had ever needed to measure it. And they had moved through the dark the way their ancestors had moved through dark forests and dark savannas, silent and patient and absolutely lethal, hunting the things that thought they were the hunters. 40,000 years of practice. That was the hidden variable in every human engagement report Sivrak went back and reviewed. Not technology, not biology, history. He requested an interview with Marcus Hale on the 3rd day after the engagement. The human was sitting in a field chair outside the Defense Force Operations Center, drinking something hot from a battered container, watching the sun come up over the plateau. He looked, in Sivrak's assessment, tired. The kind of tired that went deeper than sleep could reach. There were 11 fine lines at the corners of his eyes that the pre-engagement dossier photograph had not shown, and Sivrak found himself wondering how many of them were new. "Sergeant Hale," he said, through the translation collar at his throat. "I am Sivrak, Grail Interstellar Compact, Observation Corps. I hope I am not intruding." Marcus looked at him for a long moment with those limited, biologically unremarkable human eyes. "You're the one who was watching from the station," he said. It was not a question. Sivrak filed that away without letting his expression change. "I was." "Then you're the one I should be talking to," Marcus said. "Sit down." Sivrak sat. The sunrise on Vel Prime was a long, gradient event, the planet's slight axial tilt spreading the light over a 40-minute window, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The mining complex entrance was 200 meters away, sealed now with temporary barriers, and Sivrak could see two members of Marcus's team sitting at the perimeter with the specific quality of stillness that he had come to recognize as humans in a resting state that was not entirely resting. "You're Drathali," Marcus said. "They're going to file a tactical report about what happened in the tunnels." "They are not my Drathali," Sivrak said, "and yes, they will." "What will that report say?" Sivrak considered the question and decided that honesty served better than diplomacy here. "It will say that the engagement was anomalous, that human capability was significantly underrepresented in pre-engagement intelligence, that the Vel Prime operation failed due to incomplete threat assessment." Marcus wrapped both hands around his hot container. "That's the polite version." "Yes. The real version," Marcus said, "is that they walked into the dark and forgot that something was already living there." Sivrak said nothing. He watched the sunrise spread across the plateau. "How many species in your compact?" Marcus asked. 73 recognized members, approximately 400 observed and cataloged. "And in all of that," Marcus said, "how many of them evolved on a planet where everything was trying to eat them? Where the apex predators weren't your species, they were something bigger and faster and stronger, and the only way you survived was to be smarter and quieter and more patient than everything else in the dark." Sivrak's translation collar processed the question, and then he sat with it for several seconds. "Very few," he said finally. "Most spacefaring civilizations evolved from prey opportunist lineages in stable environmental niches. Top-of-chain predator species rarely develop the social cooperation necessary for technological advancement." "Right," Marcus said, "because being the apex predator means you don't have to cooperate. You don't have to plan. You don't have to look at something bigger than you and figure out how to kill it." He took a long drink from his container. "We had to do that every single day for 40,000 years. We got good at it." There was something in his voice that Sivrak needed a moment to identify, because it was not pride. Pride he could recognize in most species. It had a particular quality of expansion, of display. This was something quieter. It was the voice of a man stating a fact about himself that he had never particularly enjoyed being true. "I want to ask you something," Sivrak said. "Go ahead." "In the tunnels, the 11 hours, what were you thinking about?" Marcus was quiet for long enough that Sivrak thought he might not answer. The sun cleared the plateau edge and threw long golden light across the mining complex entrance, and somewhere inside the operations center, someone was making more of the hot liquid the humans seemed to require at regular intervals. "I was thinking about the people in the lower chambers," Marcus said. "The workers. There's a family down there. Vasquez family, 3 kids. Youngest one's maybe 4 years old. I was thinking about making sure she got to see this sunrise." He gestured at the plateau, at the light. "Every decision I made down there," he said, "every position, every movement, every choice about where to be and when to move and when to hold completely still for 40 minutes without making a sound, all of it was about that kid getting to see the morning." Sivrak thought about the sensor data, the kill ratio, the silence, the 11 hours of engagement in total darkness against 312 opponents. He thought about the word that had kept appearing in the Drathali transmission logs, that desperate repeated word, nothing. And he understood, finally, what the word meant. It wasn't that the Drathali sensors had failed. They hadn't. Their sensors had been working perfectly. They had been correctly reading the tunnels and reporting what they found. The humans had simply decided not to be there, not in any way that mattered. They had reduced themselves, through some act of will that Sivrak's training had no category for, to something quieter than the baseline noise of an empty tunnel. They had been present, and they had been lethal, and they had been, in every measurable sense, invisible, because they had wanted something badly enough to disappear for it. The battered container Marcus was holding. Sivrak had seen it in the mission footage, in the operations center, in the moments before the team entered the complex. Marcus had been holding it then too. He had set it down on the operations center desk before going in. He had picked it up again 11 hours and 4 minutes later when he came out. The same container. A small thing. A continuity. A promise to himself that there would be an after. The Drathali commander, a high tendrilled officer named Vexara, who had surrendered the remnant of her force to the planetary defense authorities, submitted her official after-action report to the Compact Review Council 6 days after the engagement. Sivrak obtained a copy through channels that he did not subsequently document in detail. The report was thorough, as Drathali reports always were. It contained tactical maps, sensor logs, casualty figures, and a detailed reconstruction of the engagement sequence. The final paragraph, the summary assessment, the section where commanding officers were expected to provide lessons learned for the benefit of future operations, was 11 sentences long. 10 of those sentences were tactical observations, recommendations about lighting, sensor calibration, formation spacing, communication protocols. The 11th sentence was not tactical. Sivrak had read it many times. He had, in fact, memorized it because it was not the kind of thing a Drathali commander included in a formal military report, and its presence there suggested that Vexara had considered carefully whether to include it and had ultimately decided she could not leave it out. These organisms do not experience darkness as an obstacle. They experience it as a resource. Sivrak filed his own report to the Compact Observation Corps 31 days after the Vel Prime engagement. It ran to 417 pages, which was considerably longer than any observation report he had previously submitted, and he was aware as he transmitted it that it would likely trigger a full category review of the human species. He included all of it: the kill ratios, the biological assessments and their demonstrated inadequacy, the audio captures and their repeated word, nothing, the reconstruction data, the interview transcript, the battered container. He included one additional section that had not been requested and that fell outside the standard observation report template. He labeled it simply, Observer's Note. He wrote, "In 41 years of observation work across 11 systems, I have cataloged species that are stronger than humans, faster than humans, more sensorially acute than humans, longer lived than humans, and more technologically advanced than humans at equivalent developmental stages. I have never cataloged a species that has so thoroughly excavated its own capacity for suffering and turned it into a weapon. The humans on Vel Prime did not fight because they had superior capability. They fought because one of their number decided that a 4-year-old child would see the morning. Everything else, the tactics, the silence, the 11 hours, the 312, was simply the mechanism by which that decision was honored. I do not know how to classify a species whose primary military advantage is the precision and permanence of what they choose to care about. I am not certain any existing classification applies." He transmitted the report. He sat for a long time in the observation station above Vel Prime, watching the planet rotate slowly through its long day, thinking about the way Marcus had held his coffee in both hands and watched the sun rise with the specific expression of someone who had not been entirely certain, until that moment, that he would be there to see it. 7 months later, the Compact formally reclassified humanity from Category 3 to Category 1, a designation previously reserved for civilizations with either 1,000 years of spacefaring history or a demonstrated capacity to reshape the strategic calculus of an entire regional conflict. Humans had managed it in 11 hours, in a dark tunnel, with 17 people. Sivrak was not present for the reclassification ceremony. He was on Vel Prime, sitting in a field chair outside the Defense Force Operations Center, watching the sun come up. He had brought hot tea, which was not the same as what Marcus drank, but was the closest equivalent his biology permitted, and he held it in both hands the way he had watched Marcus hold his container, because he was beginning to understand that the gesture was not incidental. It was the whole point. You held on to the small, warm thing. You made the decision that there would be an after. And then, in the dark, with everything against you, and nothing on your side but 40,000 years of practice, and the absolute refusal to let go of what you were fighting for, you disappeared into the tunnel, and you did what needed to be done, and then you came back out, into the light, every time.